The next reading is going to be Veronika Tuckerova reading her translations from Ivan Blatný, the Czech poet. She has published a select poems of Ivan Blatný. Veronika Tuckerova grew up in Prague and holds a PhD in German and comparative literature from Columbia. Her research focuses on Kafka and Prague German literature, bilingualism, and translation. Among her translations from German to Czech is Gershom Shalom's memoir From Berlin to Jerusalem. She's working on a book reading Kafka in Prague during communism, and she teaches Czech at Harvard University.
Thank you. So it is my pleasure to introduce another poet from Brno. Like Hrabal, Ivan Blatný was born in Moravia, in Kundera, for example, 5 years after Hrabal. So he was born 1919 and died in 1990. The poems that I will read today are from Ivan Blatný's collection, or rather two collections that appeared under the same title, which is Pomocná škola Bixley, or Bixley Video School. So that's quite curious that we would have two collections of different content under the same title, and it points to a very complex history of Blatný's life and publication of his works. In 1948, Blatný went to England and stayed after the communist takeover in February 1948. He spent the remaining decades until his death in 1990 in various mental health institutions in England. And in fact, Bixley, in the title of his collection, Bixley Video School, is the name of one of the buildings in one of the several institutions where he stayed. The book, which is the first collection of Blatný in English, contains poems from the time when he still lived in Brno, when he was already a very successful and celebrated young poet. And the second part of the book is from this later period, from the 1970s and 1980s. And the most striking, or perhaps the most striking part of that work is that the poems are multilingual. And we as translators, I worked on these poems with Anna Muskovakis from the Adriatic Press, were facing this challenging question. How do we translate poems that are 60% in Czech, 35% in English, and 5% in French, German, Spanish, Latin, and others? So in print, typesetting was a useful tool to render this quality. And what we did was to print the poems not side by side, as is the common practice in bilingual editions, but one above another, to complicate the notion of what is being a translation of the other. The other tool was to use gray font for those lines that appear in English in the original, so the reader can immediately see that something is odd about that poem. Now, I have never read aloud these poems, so when I was preparing for this reading, I realized that the reading is actually, of translation, doesn't have this help of typesetting. So if I read that translation, all that quality of multilingualism would be lost, and it would very much go against the very nature of these poems. So I decided that I would read the originals for those poems who are heavily multilingual, and the translation as well. So I hope it will not bewilder you, that you will hear some lines that you will just not understand, but that will approximate the experience when other readers read these poems. Some of them only know Czech, some of them only know English, And many of them know, let's say, both English and Czech, but wouldn't know German, French, Spanish, and so forth. I would also like to mention that some of the poems that I will read, I prepared especially for this reading, because there is many more poems that we haven't published yet, and we are in the process of preparing a new or first edition of this entire collection with the Big present. So this will be the first time some of these poems are read. Škola. Fred has arrived. The evening is ending happily. I got a new pen from the stores, a new old pen. It started to write in the 20s. Some of the people of the first manifestos still live. Poslední báseň 18. října. I have now 2 pens and plenty of papers. Na inkols bez nésny se staví do frontu předvídané lásky. Dark green ivy is overgrowing the vicarage. Všechny jazyky jsou mlsné. Na rohu čeká mlz vesele do nového století. Now translation. The last poem, October 18. I have now 2 pens and plenty of papers. For ink-sweet whose dreams line up in the dining hall of love. Dark green ivy is overgrowing the vicarage. All tongues are sweet food. In the corner, the sweet waves happily into the new century. Tulák spí na louce. Budiš k ničemu se toulá po ulicích města, always under pressure of the moral institutes. But he won't go to a bar still. Louky, vývízn, na něj čekají za můstem. Ví sen, jak sen, how and ví. Zbytečná otázka. Stejně si nemohu nic pamatovat. The drifter sleeps in the meadow. The good-for-nothing wanders the city streets, always under pressure of the moral institutes. But he will go to a borstel. Meadows, division, await him outside of the city. We dream, how and dream. A useless question. No matter, I can't remember a thing. Slavnost. Poetry is a panacea for all illnesses. Bratři Maxové vynštěných zloutek. Der Dichter spricht in verschiedenen Sprachen. Na dně jezera, kde vodníci nocují. Voda cesta byla zatarasena. Quite blocked by gay girls. Festivity. Poetry is a panacea for all illnesses. The Marx brothers plug the egg-yolk out. Der Dichter spricht in verschiedenen Sprachen. On the bottom of the lake where mermaids spend the night. The open road was blocked, quite blocked by gay girls. Januar sapientia. The monks speak monks. I speak Czech and English. I have an instrument for getting traffic wardens out of the drain pipes and changing them into an road. It all happens in time-space. When the traffic warden is already out, we can hear the noise. Outside and in. A group of factory buildings may be called a plant. God, the linguist, teaches us to breathe. In a hollow of a tree, there is a cart. There lives people coffee. There is a crown. There is the flamboyant Madame Blavatsky. Never light the job. Nottingham is in the north of England. Potato blight killed there all the dogs. Nemám žádná pravidla, ovšem zůstávám nerozhodnutý. Zůstanu v. America, and when you get married, the priest gets more voices to get back in the union. It is not my birthday to expect the truth of God in the morning. Happiness. Pursuit of happiness. That's one of the rights of American citizens, granted by the Constitution of 1832. What does it mean? It means to marry and have children, or not to have children and have the woman only. If you haven't got a woman, have a dog. Misspelled. So, restoration is not spelled out. I spelled it so thinking of the Czech word restaurace. To restore and go with the lady to the room, like a unicorn in the mirror, all naked in the mirror, so that I could see the blood trickling. Láska. Pitom má až 3 jazyky v ústech. Nejraději mám 2. Včela navštíví 500 květů, než naplní svůj žaludek z více špeníkové maličky. Tráví jako rilke. Probably moss, which the bumblebee can't reach. But the wood butterfly's caterpillar does. Zakleteme se v nemodílu. One of them is Rosie. She has a big Roman nose. So this one I will translate. Love. The python has up to 3 tongues in his mouth. I prefer 2. A bee visits 500 flowers until she fills her bee's stomach. She digests like rilke. Probably moss, which the bumblebee can't reach. But the wood butterfly's caterpillar does, in an enchanted butterfly forest. One of them is Rosie. She has a big Roman nose. Now a few which were written in English. Both. If it were morning in the pines, I could say gunpowder. It is afternoon on Bixley, or at Bixley. The prepositions in English are a trouble. God never made a serious error or blunder. On or at, I think, are right. Příroda. The number of ringlets on the wasp means the number of its marriages. They don't have a queen, they mate freely. Ekelhaft, sagte die Arbeiterin Biene. Look forward to pitchfork to the manure and a belt for the half. Fulfill at least one wish. I received a letter, but I will not read it. Město. The great yard is full of disused machines, held on the ground by the force of gravity. Perhaps the earth will stop turning. Here I am, A8. Budu úplně trpělivý. Mr. Cook is on and that's a soothing influence. Don't speak about the future, soothsayer. Tomorrow morning. And this is again just a translation. This Vratka ravine is in southern Moravia. If you travel to the south, you pass the central. After sleeping, I will get a kiss from Fred. I will settle in the mines like a coal baron. I will settle in the forest like moss on which the breakfast is laid out. The selector of my radio will find radio too. Gods and goddesses speaking poetry. Památce Jindřicha Heislera. Jindřich Heisler was a surrealist poet. Heisler je mrtev, ke komu se mám modlit, aby mě přijali do skupiny. Zbytkový statek, jen to a jen a já, to a jen. She was a romantic girl, she loved you, my goal. The translation. To the memory of Jindřich Heisler. Heisler is dead. To whom should I pray to be accepted to the group? The remaining estate, only Toyen and I, Toyen. She was a romantic girl, she loved you, my goal. And the last poem. Koláž místo Heislera. Dnes byl k obědu kompot a zřícenina. Filovi zmrzlinové obrazy. Bojím se, že to nedopadne dobře. The reverse horseshoe is for the witches to stop swinging. Horseshoe, like Amsterdam, Kolář mi jej ukázal z letadla. Jiří Kolář is one of the most important poets and artists of the 20th century. Check the translation. Kolář instead of Heisler. Today for lunch there was kompot and crumble. Filas, ice cream paintings. I'm afraid that it will not end up well. The reverse horseshoe is for the witches to stop swinging. Horseshoe, like Amsterdam. Kolář showed it to me from the airplane. So if there are any questions.
I'm curious to hear a little bit about your collaboration process with Anna and whoever else.
We originally wanted to publish only these multilingual poems, but what we eventually decided was to, and we asked several translators from Czech to English to choose. And we found out that they preferred some of the more traditional, older poetry of Blatný. So in the end, the book represents the different periods with some more very formal poetry and to those fragmented late poems. So I worked on those late poems with Anna, and I did the translations from Czech to English, and she was with me fine-tuning the meanings of the Czech. So she had.
Did you get in any arguments?
No. We had, and actually, I would like to. She wrote a nice essay about her experience translating Blatný, and I may quote one line which I liked from that. So Anna wrote, "Is it any more impossible to translate multilingual poems than any others? In writing Blatný's Czech into English, we encountered the usual obstacles as we attempted to render tone, meaning, and music while honoring the wordplay of which Blatný was so fond. If anything, we had a rare luxury. In the course of many poems, after we had gotten just a few words as right as we could, our job was done." And I think I like this last part when she says that in fact these poems are both very difficult to translate but also very easy. And it was a certain luxury that we had, that some work so wonderfully that you just got a few words right and you get it.
There could hardly be a better way to close this than with a poet who wrote himself in many languages. When you say that they were easy to translate, it sounds to me, though, not like you're saying that there was already some English in place, you had the feel of that, but more that once you had a few key pieces, the rest would fall into place because you had found a tone and a way. Could you describe more what you mean by it?
In some ways, they are oddly transparent, these poems. They are very, I mean, we just experienced great joy and fun with all the wordplay, and we just found that no matter which language, they just worked in any of the languages we were choosing. So there were some translators who played with it, for example, translating the pattern. That what was Czech originally they would translate into English, and what was in English they would translate into German or French or Czech. But it's sort of like, it invites this kind of playful approach, which is not to say that they are collages, and it's not to say that they are not profound or too easy, but there is some very playful and fun quality in them that you don't despair. You just somehow get a sense at some point that what you did is right. They simply work in different contexts very well.
I'm just wondering if you were ever tempted to change the English, because it's different in the context of English from the original.
Yeah, well, it's English. We must imagine a writer who was never reading these poems to anybody and had never any readers. He was simply writing for himself, and he amassed huge piles of papers that were first for decades thrown into trash until someone discovered that in fact it was Cold War situation, so he was presumed dead in Czechoslovakia for a number of years until somebody connected the dots, and one of the nurses realized that he in fact is a poet, because he didn't know any English when he came to England, and then he was interned for many decades. So obviously in an institution like that, probably there are many people who claim that they are poets. So only at that certain, but so I think that it's one very long internal monologue. These hundreds of pages that only a fraction of them were published. And his English is not good. I mean, there are mistakes, and it's not like an English in which somebody would communicate. There are fragments from TV shows and descriptions of medicines and simply the days in the institution. So we didn't correct anything, because I think there is some kind of charm in that, and genuine quality.
I wasn't thinking so much of correction, but just that it has a different meaning in a different context, but maybe that's impossible to judge.
Yeah. What's interesting is how there are free associations, that an English word would bring, just the sound of it would bring some memory or some Czech word to mind, simply on the basis of the sound. Sometimes he would, in some of those lines, he would translate one word into other languages, but then use or divide. We had the German word Wiesen for meadows, and then he would split the word into two halves, which would give him wie as how in German, and sen, which is Czech for dream. And then he would go on in that line, associating or translating this Wiesen into how a dream, because that's the German and Czech. And then he would go from there. So it's just a lot of fun.
Hi, my question's not about translation per se. I hope that's okay. I was wondering, how are the poems in the collection selected to be translated? In other words, were the ones that were selected to translate, did they follow a certain theme, or were they about certain types of emotion? How were they selected?
Do you mean the original collections or the ones that we used here?
The one that you used there.
Well, I just picked the ones that I liked in particular. So there, and I like those wordplays and those multilingual poems. So that was one of the. What was interesting is that when Blatný was in a way discovered while living in exile, he was encouraged and he created a collection with this title, Bixley Remedial School, a small collection which was smuggled to Czechoslovakia and published in Samizdat in 1982. And some scholars say that this is the only case when a book or poetry was smuggled into Czechoslovakia rather than the other way around. So that was the one edition. And then 5 years later, a poet and editor who lived in Germany created a new collection with the same title, and that was then published in Toronto in an exilic publishing house. But what's different is how the choices that this editor made, for example, that he left out those multilingual poems and he really focused only on the Czech poems, which does not give quite a complete view of the poetry of those years.
Also, that if he was in England that long, he probably sort of forgot Czech, or sort of was out of touch with Czech. It was sort of like the thing that Brodsky used to talk about after he came here, and Nabokov, would be another example. Mm-hmm. So that actually even his Czech would be not sort of standard, right?
We have a single interview that was recorded from the 1980s. And it's not quite comprehensible because there are lapses into silence, but definitely he wasn't speaking in Czech for decades. There were a few people who were visiting him occasionally, and he didn't have anything to read in Czech, apparently, as well. So his Czech is literary when he writes, and he writes without mistakes in Czech, and often it's memories. So that's when he remembers Brno or his youthful years in Brno, that's often in Czech. But when he describes the everyday life in the institutions, that's in English. So there are some easy ways of distinguishing the languages, but it's much more complicated than that. Yeah.
I think that has to be the last question. Thank you very much, Veronika.